What's going on, you beautiful people? My name's Tie-Dye. I hope you guys had a pretty awesome day today. My day's been pretty awesome so far. So welcome to a new video. I'm finally done school, so the uploads are going to be resuming once again, hopefully a couple times every single week. And I do actually have a few planned. I really want to do a new video later this week as well. If you guys remember last year, after my first year of game college, I decided to sort of, review it, explain what it was really like for those of you who haven't experienced it before. And I'm definitely planning to do that again, sort of like with an updated view on my second year. But anyways, that's in the future. This video right now, what I want to talk about is this scene right here. So if you follow me on Twitter or even Facebook, you've probably seen this scene a few times. This is my 2018 submission for a Ubisoft competition called the Next Showcase. Ubisoft Toronto does this every single year for students in Ontario, and this is my entry. I did the same thing last year. It was a much different scene, much smaller, and this year I think I've improved quite a bit. So I want to do another breakdown of the scene, explain my process, how I got to this point from start to finish, the pre-production, the actual pipeline itself, and sort of how I rounded it out. So what we were tasked to do was make this sort of futuristic chai tea stall in India, and there had to be a haunted VR pod inside of there. It was a very, very weird description. We were given a story and had to make a scene off of it, and this is my final result. So just looking off of some of these angles here, just showing off the different stuff in the scene. But as you can tell when I sort of pan out a little bit here, it is very, very I don't know, you could say that's messy, but it's more or less sort of designed to be seen within certain camera constraints. And I'll be talking about that later on, but let's just sort of go through the entire process, break down how everything was sort of done here. And to do that, we're going to have to start with the pre-production. So I'm just going to sort of close out of this for now, and we're going to dive into one of the mood boards that I made here. So before you could dive into any modeling or anything, you have to really understand what it is you're going to be making. In a previous year, I did the Ubisoft entry. It was sort of a submarine interior, and I still have the video up on my channel. I'll put that in the description if you want to see how I've changed my process since then. But essentially, one of the things that I really missed out on was the pre-production. So this year, I wanted to spend a lot of time really understanding what I wanted to make, because the pre-production, essentially, if you trip up here, your entire project is going to sort of just tumble downhill, and it's not going to end up very, very good. So this is just one of the mood boards that I made here. And the point of a mood board is just to get the ideas flowing a little bit. I just wanted to sort of understand, the textures and the environment and the nightlife and things that they'd be selling in some of these tea shops. Some of the interiors, and are they modern? Are they sort of dirty and grungy? And, after reading through the story that I was given and the source material that I had, I realized since this tea shop is supposed to be, I think it was 40 years in the future, and India typically, as you can see in these pictures, has a lot of sort of outdated stuff, what I wanted to do was have this sort of ground rule that every single thing in my scene was going to be what we would consider today modern, because 40 years in the future, it would be very old. So I'd have a bunch of modern stuff that we would think is modern today, but sort of beat it up and make it look old. And that's sort of the idea I went with. And after I came up with that, I decided to sort of sketch through a lot of this stuff, and also just, continue to figure out what life in India is like and how some people who currently live there or used to live there would find it to be in the future. And then lucky for me, I actually have 3 roommates who are all from India, so I was able to ask them a bunch of different questions about it and get some insight on it. And from there, I just came up with a bunch of different sketches. Here was the main image that I sort of, liked and enjoyed and ran with. I sort of wanted to have this big tree, which was another one of the required things that we had to have in the scene, this big tree underneath this shack that's kind of like pieced together very with a bunch of sort of different objects holding it together. I really like the idea of solar panels. I thought in the future it would make sense to have more solar energy in such a hot place. It also had to be during the holiday of Diwali, which is the festival of lights, so I wanted to have lights all over the place, the stereotypical lanterns that they have, or the traditional lanterns, I guess you would say, with a big sort of tea shop sign. And a lot of things I did change. As you can see here, what I wanted to do was sort of have a tarp front that would close. Same with the VR pod, a tarp front for there. But then I soon realized, as I started blocking stuff out in 3D, which I will bring up right now, that a lot of that wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense to sort of have a tarp front, because I have a lot of expensive equipment in here, and who's to say someone wouldn't just slice through that and just go ahead and steal it, right? So once I started blocking things out, I realized that wouldn't make a lot of sense. So after the concept, I moved into 3D space where I'm a lot more comfortable, and I started doing what a lot of people call a white box or a gray box or whatever you'd like to call it. And that's essentially just blocking things out and getting the space and dimensions for how things are going to sort of, work with each other. I have a character model in here, as you can see, just for scale, and I decided to sort of get the scale and the references for all the objects I put in here. I did end up changing a lot of things as I went into the engine. Like, as you can see, these shelves are very generic. Like, I have some chip bags that was initially supposed to be there, and just certain things on the tables I did end up going through and changing. Same with the whole design of the fridge, and this roof piece here ended up being a part of the main roof as well. So things didn't stay perfectly the same as the concept, which is exactly why I wanted to do this whole white box phase and see how things worked in 3D space. And from here, once I knew what I was going to be making, I made a detailed asset list. Now, this thing saved my life, man. So just to make this very, very clear, I had no school time to do this. This was something I had to do all completely in my spare time. So essentially, my life was complete chaos for the 4 months that this competition was going on for. You have to know that, like, I have 8 classes, right? And then I had to just sort of like piece this together all in my spare time. Like, every single asset here, the ground, and just sort of just the interior as well as the exterior. I had to put this all together in 4 months in my spare time. And like I said, with 8 classes, you don't really have a lot of spare time. So a detailed asset list was super, super important. And let me just explain why. So what I did was I made a list of every single object I needed to make, or I don't know, maybe like a particle effect or a texture or anything like that. Every single thing I needed to make. And then I broke it down into sort of checkpoints. So I wanted the first checkpoints, and each checkpoint I would have like do at the end of a week or something like that. So each checkpoint would start with like the most important assets and go to the least important assets. So the first checkpoint, for example, was to make the actual building itself. I'm like, I could definitely do that in a week. It would just be a bunch of different wall pieces, with these pillars, the roof, and this sort of tarp over top. And the tarp was actually kind of difficult to do. I ended up doing it inside of Marvelous Designer, which is a cloth-based program, and then just adding a tarp roof to it, or a tarp material, and sculpting it in ZBrush. So it turned out pretty good, I think. Overall, pretty happy with it. But yeah, so that was like the first checkpoint, and then I have an image of the second one here. So once I had that one done, I'm like, okay, second phase for the second week is let's make the T sign, the other sign here, it's sort of the generator, the tree, and all that, and essentially building upon it little by little. And I wanted to have the most important stuff done first, and then leaving things such as like the welcome mat or like the trash on the outside to the very, very end. That way, if I do run out of time, it wouldn't affect me nearly as much. So prioritizing the most important stuff first and leaving the least important stuff to the very end, which is pretty common sense, but sometimes you get really excited to do something else. Like, sometimes I was spending the majority of my time on the inside, but I'm like, God, I really just want to work on the outside and sort of get the entire, atmosphere down. Like, this was the very, very last step I did. So you just got to make sure you stay on track, and also giving yourself those deadlines is super, super important, because I had tons of projects to do and all that, but I had to make sure I found time to do this every single week. Like, there was a lot of sleepless nights cramming to get this done. But I'm very happy that I did it, and definitely planning a schedule is the only possible way you can do this kind of stuff, and expect it to be done on time. So I continued along with that, just, chipping away at it, working on more props. Like, here was one of the later ones where I had most of the stuff in place, and I wanted to sort of fill up this, sort of breaking it down into all the different objects I needed, breaking this down, and getting that done. I think that must have just been like a single weekend, just because it wasn't too many props or anything like that. And if you are wondering, the modeling applications that I used was, I modeled everything in Maya, and if I needed to, I'd do a pass in ZBrush. Then I would texture things either in the Quixel suite or in Substance Painter. And then this is the Unreal Engine, obviously, where I bring things together and render them. So once all the assets were done, which took by far the majority of the time, I went and I started doing some of the more technical stuff, such as this. This was done with a blueprint. Essentially, all it's doing is changing the texture. I just have these as different albedo textures, diffuse textures, sorry, and it's just cycling through that. Same with up here, just adding some basic animation to stuff. This fan is rotating, so just super, super simple stuff. As I showed earlier, I have some basic particle effects with things like the fire. I also have it over here on the shrine with some smoke. And then there's like smoke in the background and stuff like that, just to add some like pollution to the air and whatnot. So that was like, technically I'd put that into with the modeling pipeline and the creation process. But then once that was all done, obviously the lighting, the environment, making sure that was all done. And I wanted to make sure that I had like 2 weeks at the very end for critiques. Like I kept showing this to my classmates and people on Twitter. Obviously, if you follow me, you've seen this a ton. And even professors and stuff like that, just getting their critiques on everything the entire time. But we did have 4 months to do this, but I wanted to make sure, like I said, I had the last 2 weeks to do nothing but go through and get critiques. So I post this on forums, on Discord chats, on a bunch of different places, and get people's feedback so I can go through and change the things that needed to be changed. And I think that's very, very important because, I could have stretched out my checkpoint to the very, very end, but then I really wanted to make sure that I had time to change things. Because when you look at something for such a long time, and I found this to be very apparent with this scene, you really lose sight of things that are good and things that are bad because you're so used to it. You're so used to your own mistakes. So there were a lot of things that I should have changed, and I definitely got some great feedback from my professors especially. And just people who even if you think someone doesn't know a lot about this stuff, like their feedback can be just as important, because for someone who doesn't know the technical, they're just going to tell you if it looks good or bad without any biases or any excuses. So getting feedback from anybody is super important. So that's that. Obviously then went in through with the lighting, and what I wanted to do with this scene is tell a bit more of a story. So the actual material we had to base this whole scene off of was a story, so I wanted to sort of go through and explain that a bit more. So I actually broke this into 2 levels. So this is the evening, and like I said, this was during the night of Diwali, which is a light festival. So the action will be turned... Sure. Hopefully that doesn't mess anything up. So I made a second scene, a nighttime scene, and with this one I sort of want to continue along with the theme, and I added in fireworks to this, which once again is like a last minute thing. I actually didn't make these fireworks. I bought these on the marketplace, which obviously it's weird to not sort of include everything that's your own, but with something like this I think it's just more like icing on top. I think it was really nice to sort of have those effects up there. But I really wanted to break this into 2 different scenes, 2 different moods. And as you saw at the very beginning with the sort of mini cinematic, everything is very warm. And then once we get introduced to the haunted VR pod, things get very, very cool. And I thought that was a great way to transition, because overall, up to this point, everything is very, very uniformly warm and very welcoming. And that's what I was going for. Because typically when you think of a Indian sort of marketplace or something like that, it's very claustrophobic, and this is a very open place, so it stands out a little bit, especially from the surroundings. So I wanted there to be a huge disconnect once we enter this sort of mysterious room over here and get affected by this haunted VR pod. So that was sort of the main process with that. It definitely took quite a bit longer than I thought. This is, to this day, probably my most ambitious scene so far. I was very happy with how it turned out overall, but that was sort of the main breakdown. I guess I could show you like the inside of Maya. So this is kind of how it turned out. Like, let me just bring this up for a comparison. So this is the white box. Every single time I finished an object, I would delete the white box and replace it with the finished asset. So like, I would go in, I would finish sort of like, this used to just be a cube representing the size, but then I would go in, I'd model it, I'd replace it and delete the white box. And once I had all the objects in here completed, or not all of them, once I had the object itself completed, I would import it into Unreal Engine. I would put it in its place, I would texture it and sort of move on. So there's definitely some assets that got a bit more love in here. This sign, what I did was I actually I sort of drew it out in Photoshop, and then I went over it with the spline tool, just making these sort of neon tubes to sort of broadcast that emissive light out. Picnic benches, so the exterior stuff is out here, interior is obviously inside of here. I tried to do modular when I could. Like, let me just bring up my my layers here. So if I put the roof on, which was, like I said, done in Marvelous Designer, so the wrinkles and all that was done in there, and I put on these solar panels. So the panel is a single piece, the sort of connector is a single piece, and the rail is a single piece. So that's how I went about doing that. And then obviously I just turn these off when I don't need them, just because it gets kind of chaotic in here, as you can see. But I tried to lay it out in here, just replacing it, and that's why it's so important to do something like a white box, just to get the sense of scale and see how things sort of interact with each other in a 3D environment, because just doing like a basic concept is super important as well. Like, I'm no drawer, so this is obviously, it doesn't look that great, I understand that, but it was just to sort of get my creative juices flowing. But this, blocking it out in 3D was far more important, to me at least. Especially because a lot of the time in the industry, you're going to be just given the design to do, and then you have to block it out and see how it works. So, yeah, that's more or less it. There was a few issues that I had, like for the most part, the building, putting that together was a little more difficult than I thought, because I wanted to keep it as one main piece. I mean, typically if you're going to be doing a lot of buildings, you'd use modular walls, but I wanted to keep this all in one piece. So sort of figuring out how to separate the UVs into different islands and how to properly do that without losing too much resolution was kind of tricky. Issues like how would this place actually function was kind of difficult. I wanted to sort of ground this in reality a bit more, so I could sort of take ideas from reality. And what I mean by that is, like I said before, if this is a very hot place, let's say, we'll give it solar panels. And if we give it solar panels, it'll need a generator. If it needs a generator, you know, it's going to have limited electricity usage and stuff like that. I thought the more I leaned on reality, the more I could sort of, you know, take ideas from that, and I wouldn't have to think of anything too crazy, because this is supposed to be 40 years in the future, and 40 years, like, not a lot of stuff changes, especially in a country where development is a little bit slower, such as India, compared to, you know, North America, or maybe, you know, China or Japan or something like that. So I tried to add some like Western elements as well, from like a coffee shop like Starbucks or something. So the pre-production was super important. By far the most important step. And if there's anything I want you to take from this video, is spend your time planning things out. Do multiple sketches, do a white box scene, just sort of figure all of that stuff out. But overall, that is the scene. I guess I could talk about the tree real quick. This was done inside of SpeedTree, which is an entire program made just for foliage and stuff like that. The particle effect is done in the Unreal Engine. I sort of just have some of the flower petals as well as the leaves falling down from there, a light breeze. In reality, I should have the breeze affecting stuff like this, but I just, well, one, I don't really know how to. I probably should have looked into that, and two, I think I didn't have enough time to do stuff like that. Breeze is just kind of affecting all the foliage right now. I even have a lot of stuff in the back here, but obviously you're never really going to see that kind of stuff. And then the modular solar panels up here, sort of just connecting with all these. Once again, these are just all the same pieces, just used a bunch of different times. Like, you will see some variance in these solar panels, but that's just because I have some decals on those, which are just sort of projected textures, just to break it up a little bit. But that's more or less how I went through with all of this. I pretty much modeled everything in the scene, and that's why it took so long. If I was using other people's parts, it wouldn't take nearly as long. Like, there were certain things that I used that weren't mine, like these buildings was from a free pack that you could find on the Unreal Marketplace, as well as these trash bags I didn't make, and these like just wooden things. But these are all like minor details that I put in the background. Everything else I wanted like the main focal points all to be mine. So I think every single item in this tea shop is mine. Yep, everything in here that just everything in here I did create. The benches, the majority of stuff is just more or less these tiny details like the garbage bags. Anything that's trash related, other than the cans or the bins themselves. And then these buildings are from a pack, but everything else I made. So once again, pre-production is super important. Work modular if you can with things like these solar panels. And break things down into lists. Lists they'll save your life, man. They really will. There's no way I could have done this if I was just chipping away at it blindly for a couple of weeks. Especially because there was set checkpoints. Like, if I didn't have checkpoints, I didn't have like, I need to have X amount done by the end of the week, this would never have been completed. And it's also helpful because if you rush and get it ahead, or get ahead and get all your stuff done for the week, then you can sort of chill out for a little bit, or focus more on your schoolwork. Or if you're being really crazy like me, you could get next week's checkpoint done in the same week. So that way you have more time off. So I was pretty happy with this. Obviously, there's plenty of room for improvement with this kind of scene, but overall, I was happy with the quality I made with the amount of time that I had. And yeah, that's pretty much the breakdown of this entire scene. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully you learned something. Like I said, I'm going to be posting more videos. I'm going to have sort of a review of my second year of game development college, sort of explaining all the things that I've learned this year, and hopefully some advice for you guys who are trying to break into the industry just like me. But other than that, more tutorials to come. If you have any recommendations or any requests rather, let me know with a comment down below. But it's good to be back. I will hopefully be posting at least one video a week this summer. We'll see how that goes. There's still a lot more projects. Like I want to make another scene like this over the summer. And I'm also going to be working full time starting Monday. So I'm definitely going to be busy. But I definitely need to be busy. I'll explain that. I'll definitely explain that in my next video. I'm the kind of guy who needs to be busy all the time. But hopefully you learned something. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I hope you have a great day. So once again, my name's been Tie-Dye. Hopefully you enjoyed the video like I said, and I'll catch y'all later. See ya.